Broadcasting from the Business RadioX studios, it's time for Business Leaders Radio. Now, here's your host, John Ray.
And hello again, everyone. Welcome to Business Leaders Radio. I am John Ray, and we have another great guest on today's show. Adam Scharfer is with us. Adam is with Not in Sales. Yes, you got that right. The company is named Not in Sales, and get this, his title is Not a Salesperson. Adam, welcome.
Hey, John, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Hey, I'm delighted to have you and anxious to get to the first question, which is you're obviously not in sales. So let's talk about that. How are you serving folks out there?
All right. So a little bit of a background, I guess, on my career. I started very much not in sales, so it's quite the opposite. I was a comp sci grad. And by the way, most computer science people I've met do not have aspirations of being salespeople. I'm not sure if that's a surprise to you. I didn't necessarily either, but I also didn't want to be sitting at a desk coding all hours of the day, so much. So for me, it was like one of those, I'll figure this out down the line, what I really want to do when I grow up type thing. So my first, I guess, quote unquote, real job out of college was writing code and working with databases. It was for a company that implemented an asset management solution called IBM Maximo. So there's a lot of business partners out there. There's a business partner that's implementing that huge as a commercial off the shelves product that was tailorable. So at an early stage, I was exposed to all kinds of customers because every entity, public, private sector, has assets that they need to maintain. You look at manufacturing plants, you look at water, wastewater, power generator. I mean, like everybody has assets, and so the maintenance on that. So I really enjoyed attending like the functional meetings and I really had a knack for understanding the user requirements and quickly planning and implementation for their specific use cases. So over time, I was doing less technical work and leading more customer-facing meetings, managing projects. And then much later down the line, I was leading the department, the operations department, with a team of about 25 people responsible for the entire ops group for all of the work that the company had. I guess it was our East Coast ops, so it was everything east of the Mississippi River. That was our good dividing line. And so I was pulled into, because of that role, I was pulled into supporting a lot of times the sales processes because we had to keep our team busy. We had to keep them billable. So I find myself writing proposals, attending the trade shows and conferences, presenting on the company's value add, and pretty much supporting both sales and delivery. And so it was a busy job. Learned a lot. I was very fortunate for it. And things changed for me about 6.5 years ago. I was started a family, became a dad, and I really just needed more control over my schedule. And I was okay with the idea of maybe not running a department of 25 people at that time. And I thought to myself, look, I've basically been unofficially doing sales for all these years. Why not give it a shot in an more official capacity, right? So I moved over to another company that was focused on implementing the same product, still on the Maximo side. But my role this time around was explicitly sales. My title was account manager, because we have to have these titles that avoid the word sales. So account manager, account executive, solution advisor, because there's this stigma around it, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So ironically, it ended up being a much easier job. As long as I was hitting my quota, I really didn't have to worry about managing an entire team and all the extra stuff. And it was so helpful having the technical background as well as the project delivery experience when it came to being in these competitive situations, because I didn't have to feign understanding or empathy of a given challenge a client was having, because I was fortunate enough to have experience as a developer and as a business consultant from these other roles. I never really had to go into, what you'd call sales mode, because these were real conversations that built trust and confidence in what I was doing. I never really wanted to be just the sales guy. And from what I observed, my clients didn't really want that either. So it really worked. And so, after several years in sales, doing it this way and observing how other sales calls are conducted, I thought, why can't we take a more refreshing approach like this everywhere? What's really stopping us? I constantly see technically minded people killing it on sales calls while the actual salesperson who contributed next to nothing of value, the tech guy will be the first one to say when asked about price or anything like that, like, oh, I'm not in sales. You'll have to talk to the salesperson about that. And they almost single-handedly landed the account and are often the most humble person there. And meanwhile, you have the sales guy getting in the picture like, yeah, we did it, bro. And it's like, all right, come on. And so that's how I got to not in sales, from a brand, cute branding perspective, have a little fun with that. Right. So
Sure.
often those who are most effective at truly conveying value of a service or a solutions are the same ones that are telling you that they're not in sales. So that's how we got here.
I want you to say that last sentence one more time. I want to underline that for people.
So the people that's, and this is not an always type thing, but more often from what I've observed is that those who are most effective in truly conveying value of a service or solution are the same ones that are telling you that they're not in sales. And that's the irony of the whole thing, because they're the ones that probably made the thing happen.
Wow. That is priceless right there. I think we can end this interview right now. I mean,
Okay.
that alone, that alone is worth people listening to this interview. So thank you for that, because there are so many, and this is not just true for technology, right? This is true for anyone that's that technician in professional services, right? That CPA or whatever that doesn't think they're in sales, right? They don't realize how effective they can be.
It's true. It really is. And you don't have a lot of people that want to get in front of people and present and stuff like that. But what they find when you play to people's comfort and strengths, like, look, you've built half this product. How are you not the best person to talk about it? Well, I'm not really good with people and all that stuff, but they don't really need to be, you don't really have to have a great conversation about the weather or what people did last. They don't care, show them that you're an expert on something, make them feel comfortable that way.
Mm-hmm.
You being a subject matter expert is what's going to make them feel comfortable, not having the exact social cues that, you think are required for that. And it's, a lot of times you're empowering people that otherwise didn't think they could do something like that.
Well, let's talk about I guess maybe the way to approach this is, let's first of all talk about the legacy sales tactics that you think should be avoided.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay. So I guess in order to improve or change any kind of tactic, it's important to look at what has changed over time to really pivot from strategies that don't really hold up anymore today. So you have a ton of these supposed proven methodologies where they say they've been around for decades and they're the industry standard and best practice. And, my issue with that is that people have changed, policies have changed, and technology has changed. So the best practice of yesterday might be exactly what you shouldn't or can't even be doing today. And you don't have to go back that far, but you look at the 80s, right? So sales was almost strictly in person for a lot of reasons. You're flying around for different meetings, a ton of whining and dining to impress people, all that kind of stuff. No limits to what you really could do to try and win over a client. And you're often buying their love to get their business in a sense, right? And so, the reason is that, HR was pretty minuscule back then, both headcount and policy, and it's obviously grown over time. So there's now a lot of limitations on both sides, the vending company and of course the buyers, there's policies now where employees can't accept gifts or dinners over a very small amount. And basically the short answer is the music stopped when Toby Flenderson entered the building, right? So it's a whole different landscape out there. And then another, I guess, more recent thing is how the pandemic had permanently changed how initial meetings are done. We learned that we can very quickly vet things over an initial video conference, for a first meeting at least. Very rarely are we flying out for these types of things. So again, the dynamic has changed quite a bit. And so I guess because of that, I'll give an example. So something that most people can agree on. PowerPoint is probably one of the worst things that has ever been unleashed on humanity. It's probably its own pandemic. It's now that we have more Zoom meetings, we get to have even more PowerPoint. And I don't think anybody's excited about that, to be honest with you. The last thing anybody wants to be is mundane when interacting with a prospective client. And when was the last time somebody bought a solution because they loved the 30-minute PowerPoint presentation that they had to sit through before the engineer took over and showcased the actual product, via like a live demo?
Mm-hmm.
So my favorite, and this is my favorite. So when a sales rep is kicking things off by saying something to the effect of, I'll just get through these slides really quickly. And of course, it's never quick. Real quickly, and then turn it over to my demo engineer so that they can demonstrate the product, right? So imagine explicitly acknowledging that your audience doesn't want to sit through a 30-minute death by PowerPoint and still doing it. There's nothing. I mean, look, I got to tell you, there's nothing wrong at all with skipping these false imprisonments for your audience. Put it this way. If you book an hour meeting with somebody or a group of people to showcase your solution, is the best portion of their attention span, tell me, John, is it going to be their first 30 minutes or is it going to be the back half?
Right.
What's going to be the best attention?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're taking all the energy out of the room. Exactly.
So put the stuff they came to see as close to the beginning as possible.
Right.
And that's not to say, look, it's not to say don't have a slide deck. One shouldn't exist. I'm not saying that. Some kind of documentation. But if every slide is instead a backup slide and you jump straight into the meat of the presentation and the demonstration, you can keep it interactive. And someone asks a question that a slide can answer, oh, sure, put it up on the screen. And people suddenly like PowerPoint once it's not a mandatory sit through. And instead, it's like, hey, smart guy, you just asked such an important question. We have a slide that breaks this down even further, and we'll be providing this deck, by the way, in its entirety to all of you. It comes off sharp, and better yet, when you do this, I don't even need the full hour that you booked. So one of two things are going to happen. You're going to have a lot more time for interactive opportunities through a more extended Q&A, as the demo goes through or even after, where you're really establishing that trust and building relationships. Or you end 20 to 30 minutes early on a booked hour, and they will remember and love you for life for just that alone. So it's a win-win, no matter how you look at that.
Well, and just to be clear here, we're talking about mostly technology companies. I mean, that's really where you spend your time with those type of clients, correct?
That's correct. But a lot of this applies, to just about anything. I mean, it is, what are people doing? So, you've got them, you've booked their time for an hour. How do just because you feel like you have to get through something doesn't mean you should. And so it's all about reading the room in that. And that really does apply. Technology is my focus, but that really does apply to a lot of different things. And I do think the slides are a crutch in a lot of ways, and that people can really do a lot better things with that time. It just takes up so much time, so much valuable time, so much of people's best time, that I think that it just should be looked at a little bit differently.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm trying to keep from rolling in the floor laughing here, because I've been, one of those 18 people in a conference room with in corporate with the mandatory PowerPoint that people have struggled with for weeks prior to that. Right. And by coming in that way, you're really, by definition, it's all about you. It's not about the client, right? I mean, by definition, because you spent all this time on what you're all about, as opposed to having just a human conversation about what that client's issues, problems, wants, needs, hopes are.
You're exactly right. It's you show up and then you start presenting, like get through these slides, that kind of thing. And you haven't really done a proper discovery. You haven't really gotten the room to really speak up and understand their pain points. And, you've got people that, even if they're junior in sales, some people do it a long time. They feel like if they're not talking or controlling the room, they're not doing their job. And it's quite the opposite now. I mean, people really want to make this interactive and give them a chance, so the worst thing you can hear is you spend all this time on a PowerPoint slide and they're like, okay, well, can we just see the demo? I mean, it's, and then you get through that, and then you demo and you touch on things that maybe they didn't care about. And there's other stuff that your product can do that they do. And why? Because you had to fill it with all this stuff, where these are times you could have been discovering which parts of the product they really needed. And so, you kind of backed yourself into a corner there.
Yeah. So, wow.
I'll give you another example of
please.
But sort of like legacy things, right? Oh, the book says the 8 touch point rule, right? The sales supposed experts say an average of 8 touches are needed in order to close a sale. I mean, does that really hold up today? I mean, I don't know about you, but most people I know can't stand being in a sales sequence. I mean, forget the blatantly automated emails with the cheesy subject lines like, "Are you okay? We haven't heard from you after emailing you several times. Should we send for help?" I'm not even talking about that. But when you have reps calling or emailing, so this is after the presentation, we're just somebody's pipeline, just checking in to see if you've reviewed our quote and if you have any questions, or did you get your 2023 budget approved, or are you ready to move forward? Look, if they weren't blown away by what was shown to them, do you really think that these touch points are going to make a difference because the sales Bible says so? I mean, at least they can rest easy knowing that you're only going to do it 6 more times before finally leaving them alone, right? Because it's 8 touch points if they're lucky, right? So, it's just, you simplify the first meeting, you make it less of a pitch and more of an informative discussion and demonstration. You don't need a series of follow-up touches in most cases. I almost think that a lot of cases post-meeting or demo, you can wrap it up by sending an email with the slides that you didn't force them to sit through, send them a quote, okay, of course, and even tell them that you're happy to answer questions and out of respect for their time, you're not going to constantly be checking up or pressuring them, and assure them in that email or however that you close that conversation that you are definitely interested in their business, but don't want to put them in a position where they have to make something up to get you to leave them alone while they decide. And it's just one of those things. Like, you don't ever want to be the person calling on somebody and they're trying to look for a reason to buy themselves time until the next time you're going to call them. You have just pigeonholed yourself as the sales guy.
Well, but you have to have some follow-up, right?
You absolutely do.
So what's the right way to do it then?
It has to be tactical, right? So you leave certain things in there. You obviously, you can feel free to put somebody on your marketing list, anything that's like opt out or anything like that. So there's things out there that are, you're giving out information. So as long as your marketing is doing its job. So I'm not, I don't come from a marketing background. It's more on the sales side, but as long as you have strong enough marketing to keep promoting what you're doing, you're going to start, and a part of that marketing is giving some good information away for free for anybody that's subscribed to you. You're going to constantly be reminding them anyway. And if they opt out of it, well, you've gotten your answer. If they say, I don't want to see these emails anymore, because, and if you're sending bad marketing emails, that's a different problem. But if you're sending informative stuff that they want to read about, and you have ways to do that without it just being any update. There's a lot of different ways to provide information. And, I know you mentioned something about this. I just saw this article. It might be just something that's organic. That's like, you're building a relationship with somebody. And yeah, they know you have a quote out there. You have a quote out there, but you don't need to address it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I think what you're saying is just be real,
mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah,
I mean,
it's common sense, but it's so often forgotten, right?
Right. Yeah. Wow. Great words from Adam Scharfer. Adam is not in sales, folks, because he's not a salesperson. I love that. That's the best title and company name I've run into in a while, Adam.
Well, I mean, so titles are BS, right? Let's just be honest. You run a small company. Do I really need to call myself the Chief Executive Officer of Not in Sales LLC? Big deal. You know what I mean? Like, let's get over ourselves. The VP of this. A lot of titles. Nobody really cares about your title. And I just thought, something a little bit different. My business card will have the business name and it'll have my name on it. And it'll say not a salesperson. Well, you're going to remember that. You're not going to remember like founder and CEO of some business you ever heard of. So I just wanted to do something a little bit different.
I love it. Let's talk about, I guess, building a good business relationship, because relationships are they're the currency of business. They still are, whether they're virtual or in person. Talk about how you define that, how you build it.
So basically, I guess, it really comes down to what is a good relationship versus not such a great relationship. And so, you're looking to build or grow a business. You're a CEO, you're a VP of sales or a salesperson. And you really don't want to be approaching it with the mentality of a seller meeting with a buyer at every encounter. So you look at it as when people open up their calendars for you, you treat it as an opportunity first and foremost to learn. We talked about this a little bit. You can glean as much as you can by researching, the company and like what they've done, but nothing can truly replace interactive discovery, as we talked about. Answer questions directly. Look, if a feature in your product or your service is something isn't supported and it probably won't be in the future, just say so instead of doing that whole, well, it's on our roadmap dance. I mean, if you're as clear and direct about what you're offering doesn't do as what it does do, you're earning that trust. You're building that relationship in the process. People do appreciate that. The simple, no, we don't do that. That's just not our focus, that kind of thing. And then for existing clients, I mean, you want to grow your relationship and obviously have a long-standing relationship and do more and more for, each of your clients, right? I mean, you want to keep your existing clients and build into them. So for existing clients, don't treat every meeting that you're invited to as an opportunity to further upsell products or services. If you want them to keep including you, you don't really want to be doing that unless the conversation directly invokes it or at least highly implies it, right? An invitation to do so. So remember, you want to be partners, not just sellers talking to buyers. And if you're positioning yourself that way, whenever you have airtime, they're just going to presume, I guess, that that's the extent of what you see them as, is just buyers. And not everything has to be billed either. You can give away some really helpful information without running the meter, so to speak. I mean, don't assume that you're giving the bar away either, because when you're doing this, you're a trusted advisor who's maintaining a good relationship as peers, instead of appearing like opportunistic. When you get to a certain status with them, they're going to be the ones asking for a quote with you having to even suggest it. And those are the quotes that don't need 8 touch points to complete. They move really fast.
So I can hear some people, I think, might be thinking, okay, so that advice makes sense to me, but Adam, here's the reality. Since you deal in reality, I'm on a sales quota. I mean, I've got to make it happen, right?
Yeah.
So what's this tension between not always trying to upsell and trying to build relationships versus I gotta hit the bar, right?
So I guess so part of it is so if you're a leader of a technology company, right? And you're trying to build a team. So I think it's what's important first and foremost is to trust yourself, because you created this, you have an offering, trust your team, and trust what you're offering more than trying to create a perfect sales process, because those processes in excess can lead to inorganic and transactional conversations instead of trust and relationship building. So if your client-facing personnel are constantly trying to keep adhering to overly needy sets of internal processes, look, you might have a perfect CRM filled with all kinds of so-called good data, but when the time is right for them to shine, where are your sales team's heads going to be? Are they going to be pursuing maybe a not so good fit opportunity because it's already in the system and they fear having to share that opportunity as lost on the next internal cadence call? I mean, sometimes people just keep opportunities going for they're managing up, and they're more worried about how they're going to look in their next internal meeting than they put all their energy into that than to worrying about how they're actually coming across during the actual meetings that count, which are with the clients. So what could they have been doing instead of just trying to force something because they feel backed into that corner? I mean, to be fair, no sane leader is going to wake up in the morning and look at themselves in the mirror and say, I really want to be a horrible ogre to my team today, right? I mean, but when their processes are, I guess, ogreish in nature, it doesn't really matter how nice and delicate their personality is. You've got your team focused on internal bureaucracy more than with the clients, right? And so I think that a lot of what you're talking about can be solved if a lot of that pressure is taken off the team to feel like they have to be more on their game for their own management than they have to be for their clients. It should be the other way around.
Okay, so let's talk to the sales leaders, sales managers. I think you act in that role as on an outsourced basis. Am I correct about that?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay. So we'll get more into that in just a second. But that sales manager they're responsible for those relationships getting deepened and turned into revenue. That's a soft measure, right? I mean, how much have you been out there building those relationships that ultimately are going to lead to long-term success for the business? How do you monitor that and make sure that people are successful at that?
And that's a great question, honestly, because I feel a lot of business owners have that same concern, or VP of sales, whatever. I mean, they're tasked with doing that. Well, here's part of the problem in the beginning, right? I think a lot of businesses are too quick to have a dedicated perform that sales management function before they have the kind of headcount to justify it, right? A lot of mistakes in the relationship building process between those who are selling and their prospective clients are because most of these sellers, their energy is, prioritizing the needs of the manager or the CEO, right? We talked about that. But I think that most sales managers are well-meaning. They often come from a career of being salespeople. And by the way, not all the best salespeople make the best sales managers, and we know that. It's just not always the right, but a lot of them come from being salespeople. And as a result, they'll want to apply what worked for them in a previous era in today's landscape. So again, we have these cadence calls where you have these internal stand-up calls where you go through the pipeline and you're expected to speak line by line about every opportunity, when it's going to close, how much revenue can be expected from it. These are extremely stressful for your team and often degenerate into these impromptu contests of who has the most going on, you or your other guy, the other guy in sales, all that stuff. And I understand that business owners, as I mentioned, need to forecast their revenue, and they need to be able to show a healthy pipeline for a variety of reasons. I mean, we're going to get our credit pulled if we don't, right? That kind of stuff.
Sure.
It is important, but they have to consider that creates a less than desirable interaction with the sales team and their clients. They get in this mentality of what can I bring home from today's call or presentation to show up at tomorrow's internal call, and it's really challenging for people to organically build trust and relationships when they're under such pressure. And so you go back to smaller companies; they're hiring full-time sales managers too soon. Right? Because, and a lot of times, usually because the CEO needs to get out of that role, or somebody at a C-level, just to focus on strategic things, help grow it in other ways. But often in their haste to do so, they don't realize that with the right team, they don't need someone doing that full time. If you hire a dedicated babysitter for that, and it basically creates unnecessary churn and distraction for those who need to be most focused on their relationships with the clients. And so, my solution to that is, you have to be smart in who you're hiring, into your team. But, when you have a small headcount, a small team under 10, you don't necessarily need somebody full time watching what they're doing, how many calls they're making, a lot of stuff. A lot of that stuff's automated by the CRMs anyway. That's doing a lot of the work for you. And, it's really not the fault of the person that's taking that role on full time. But if they've been tasked with doing that and they're on the hook for it, look, some of the worst micromanagers are the first ones that say, I'm not a micromanager. They come out without even asking if they're a micromanager or not. In my experience, anybody that tells me without even asking, I'm not a micromanager, they turn out to be the biggest micromanagers out there, right? It's just nobody asked, but okay, let me know. And so, but they feel compelled because they're in this sort of spot where they're reporting directly to a CEO or a C-level, and they have to make the numbers work. And so what I'm saying is, you don't need somebody around the clock doing that. If you have the right team, they know what they need to be doing. The numbers are right there. It's clearly spelled out in their comp plans, which also should be written effectively to properly incentivize them. And you go from there.
And that's really where you come in. I alluded to it earlier that your services are really as a fractional chief sales officer, even though you're not in sales, sales leader, whatever you want to call it in the organization, right? That you're really that outsourced resource to be able to drive that part of the business without, as you say, having to commit a full salary to that role.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And it's not just the cost savings. It is also just creating a dynamic where the sales team themselves manage their own relationships and their book of business, and they don't have to follow a certain metric of, oh, you have a call with them. Well, what are you going to get out of that? Are you going to talk to the decision maker? We'll make sure that they get the quote. You make sure, when you do that, you're basically putting them in the mindset of, if I don't walk out of this call having these boxes checked for this manager, I will have not done it the right way. But what is the opportunity cost there? You might not have done it. You might not have, quote unquote, been yourself in that meeting.
Right.
You're doing something that is, kind of forcing you to extract things or get some sort of consent, out of the meeting, and then handing it over at the next call. How'd it go? How'd the call go? What did you get? What's it looking like? Is it going to close next week? That kind of thing.
Yeah. Wow. Great words here from Adam Scharfer. Adam, we're coming down to time, but I want to make sure that our audience understands the types of companies that you work with. We mentioned earlier that you work mostly with technology companies. Are there certain subsectors within technology that are more important for you or not? And size of companies. What size companies do you work with?
I would say the size of the company is probably more important than necessarily the type of technology. I mean, technology can be a lot of different things, but, a lot of the ideals that I've been speaking about really apply to most different places that are trying to grow. I've been targeting a lot of smaller companies, 10 or, basically 10 to 50 employees, something like that, where they've got something, there's clearly, they've got something still in that startup range or small company looking to grow. and just can't really, it's like we have everything right. Why isn't it working with sales? We're going through a bunch of different salespeople. We tried this, we tried that. And a lot of times, they're looking to emulate something that's not them. So you have this unique, innovative product, right? You spend the time building something like that. And then yet you follow the book on something with the sales process around it. You have to be creative. You have to be creative in the way you build that sales presence as well, and tailor it to what your offering is, as opposed to taking something that's been done by a large company and then just trying to scale it down. It doesn't really work that way in a like-to-like fashion. And so, to answer your question, I would say on smaller companies, 10 to 50 employees is really, I guess, the sweet spot in that. When you start getting bigger and all that stuff, then you can start looking at justifying, more oversight on things, right? You got a lot of moving parts, that kind of stuff. So, and there's a point where, it does make sense to have somebody in charge of sales and marketing explicitly day to day. But I think that a lot of times small businesses jump the gun a little bit quickly.
Commit too early to that.
Sorry,
they commit too early to that function.
Too early, exactly. Almost to their death. Correct. Yeah.
Got it.
And and another thing I would say is just as a piece of advice is like, look for, kind of going back to the beginning, look for hidden talent from within. You have a lot of these engineers that are doing the actual demonstrating of a solution for a pitch, and they have no clue that they're making the deal happen, right? They're the ones that say not in sales, right? Or they're not in sales. And that's not to say that you as the CEO need to run around at your next all hands meeting screaming, everyone sells like a lunatic. I mean, everything is, everything's relative, right? If you're a small business though, you don't need to create an explicit sales organization. You have an advantage as a business at an early or small stage to blend some of those functions and do it differently, stand out a bit from all these boring places trying to emulate an IBM org chart for their startup. It just doesn't fit that way. Yeah.
Wow. This has been terrific, Adam. Adam Scharfer, Not in Sales is the name of his company. Adam, such great insights. And I can't imagine that there aren't some folks that, having heard this interview, don't want to be in touch with you. So let's give them directions on how they can find you.
Sure. It's an easy URL, notinsales.com, and you can find me at adam@notinsales.com. So try to keep things simple in that category. Feel free to reach out. And yeah, I definitely want to thank you, John, for having me as a guest today, and your audience for putting up with me as well.
Absolutely. I look forward to having you again soon. This has been fantastic. Adam Scharfer, folks.
Before I forget, John, sorry, yeah. Special shout out to my man, Greg Burkhalter, the LinkedIn guy, for introducing me to you and helping me redo my LinkedIn page, getting all that sorted. He's a really talented and helpful guy. So just I'd be remiss if I didn't mention him.
That's a great shout out, because Greg Burkhalter really is the LinkedIn guy. So thank you for that. And thank you, Greg, for introducing Adam and I. This has been a lot of fun. Adam Scharfer, again, folks, with Not in Sales. He's not a salesperson at Not in Sales. I love it. Adam Scharfer, thanks again for coming on. We appreciate you.
Thank you as well, John.
And folks, once again, I'm John Ray. Thank you for joining us on this edition of Business Leaders. If you want to know more about this series, you can find it on businessleadersradio.com. And do me a favor. You, our listeners, have done this repeatedly with shows like this. You've heard a business leader that you particularly like. You've shared the show on social media and with others that just privately that you think need to hear this a particular business leader, in this case, Adam, that we've had today. So continue to do that, because that's how we get the word out about the great business leaders that we feature here on Business Radio X, as our mission is to be the voice of business and feature business leaders that ordinarily don't get heard on major media. So thank you for your support in that regard. So once again, I'm John Ray. Thank you again to Adam Scharfer for joining us on Business Leaders Radio.